The signal arrived at Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, 7 at exactly 3:14 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. It was faint but distinct, unlike anything the computers had ever recorded before. Mark Wilson was halfway through his night shift, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at screens that rarely showed anything interesting. Then the alert flashed across his monitor. "Hey, we got something," he called to his colleague Jim, who rolled his chair over to look. "Probably another false positive," Jim said with a yawn. But his eyes widened as he watched the pattern repeat itself. Steady, deliberate, and undeniably artificial. Within an hour, every major space agency on Earth was analyzing the transmission. By morning, the impossible truth had been confirmed. Humanity had received its first communication from an extraterrestrial intelligence. The signal originated from just beyond the orbit of Neptune. When telescopes were hurriedly repositioned, they detected what had been hidden in plain sight: a massive fleet of ships, drifting silently at the edge of our solar system. General Robert Hayes of the United Earth Space Command assembled a team of the best scientists, linguists, and military personnel. Their mission was simple in theory but monumental in practice: understand the message and determine if it posed a threat. Dr. Emily Chen, the world's foremost expert in theoretical communication systems, led the decoding effort. For 3 days straight, she worked with barely any sleep. On the 4th day, she entered the command center with a strange look on her face. "It's a distress call," she announced to the room of anxious officials. "They need our help." No one spoke for several seconds. Then General Hayes asked the question on everyone's mind: why would advanced aliens capable of interstellar travel need help from us? The decoded message explained their situation. The alien fleet, belonging to a civilization calling themselves the Luminary, had suffered catastrophic drive failures. Their massive ships, carrying millions of refugees, were stranded with failing life support systems. Despite their advanced technology, they lacked the specific resources and expertise needed for repairs. Most surprisingly, they had deliberately sought out Earth, having observed human civilization for decades. Their message included detailed information about their systems, almost like a technical manual provided to a repair service. "They're not asking us to save them with our technology," Dr. Chen explained. "They're asking us to help them think of solutions they haven't considered. They believe humans possess a unique problem-solving ability." General Hayes ordered the formation of the first contact mission. Captain David Miller, a decorated Space Command officer with engineering expertise, would lead a team of 30 specialists to the alien flagship. As preparations began, public reaction to the news varied wildly. Some saw it as humanity's greatest opportunity, others as a potential trap. Religious groups debated the theological implications, while governments argued over who should represent Earth. Through it all, the Luminary waited, their situation growing more desperate by the day. 2 weeks after the signal's arrival, humanity's response team launched from the moon base on the spacecraft Hope. As the fastest vessel humans had ever built, it would reach the alien fleet in 5 days. On board, Captain Miller studied the Luminary technical data. He couldn't shake a strange feeling. The aliens seemed simultaneously far advanced and oddly limited. Their technology was elegant and efficient, but lacked redundancy and practical workarounds. "It's like they've never had to improvise," he told his second-in-command, Lisa Puttle. "They've never had to make do with duct tape and spare parts." As the Hope approached the massive alien ships, gleaming silver against the blackness of space, humanity prepared for its first steps into a much larger universe. Not as students, but as unexpected teachers. The universe, it seemed, needed humanity's unique gift for finding solutions in impossible situations, and the Luminary were just the first to ask for help. The human spacecraft, Hope, slowed as it approached the massive alien flagship. Up close, the Luminary vessel was even more impressive. A gleaming structure nearly 5 miles long with a strange, flowing design that seemed to defy conventional engineering. Captain Miller's team stared through the viewports in silent awe. None of their training had prepared them for this moment. "Remember," Miller said to his crew, "we're not here as explorers or diplomats. We're here as mechanics." This brought a few nervous laughs, breaking the tension. The docking procedure was surprisingly simple. The Luminary had sent detailed instructions, and their airlock systems were compatible with human technology by design. As the Hope's airlock sealed against the alien ship, Dr. Patel checked the atmosphere readings. "Breathable mix," she confirmed. "Slightly higher oxygen than Earth, but within safe limits." Miller nodded. "Helmets on standby only. Let's show trust." When the doors finally opened, the humans had their first face-to-face encounter with the Luminary. The aliens stood about 7 feet tall, with slender bodies and skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint blue light. Their 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, blinked in sequence as they observed the humans. The lead alien stepped forward. "I am Admiral Krell," it said in perfect English, its voice resonating with an unusual harmonic quality. "We welcome you to the Voyager fleet. You have our eternal gratitude for answering our call." Miller stepped forward and extended his hand, a gesture the aliens had studied. "Captain David Miller, United Earth Space Command. We've come to help." The humans were escorted through corridors that seemed to glow from within. The ship was beautiful, but eerily quiet. They passed hundreds of Luminary, many of whom appeared weak or ill. "Our life support systems are operating at minimal capacity," Admiral Krell explained. "Of our 300 ships, 57 have already lost all power. We managed to evacuate most, but we lost 30,000 lives before you arrived." The gravity of the situation became clear. This wasn't just a repair mission. It was a rescue operation with millions of lives at stake. In the ship's central command center, the Luminary engineers displayed holographic models of their propulsion systems. The technology was centuries beyond anything humans had developed, yet the problem seemed surprisingly basic. Their fuel synthesis systems had failed, and they had no way to harvest new resources efficiently in deep space. Engineer Mike Jackson studied the schematics with growing confusion. "Your technology is incredible," he said to the Luminary chief engineer. "But why don't you have backup systems or manual overrides?" The alien seemed puzzled by the question. "Such redundancies would be inefficient. Our systems are designed for perfect operation." "But nothing works perfectly forever," Jackson replied, "especially in space." This simple exchange revealed the core of the problem. The Luminary had evolved in an environment of abundance and stability. Their technology had developed toward perfect efficiency rather than rugged reliability. They had never needed to improvise or make do with limited resources. Humans, by contrast, had risen from a harsh world where survival often depended on makeshift solutions and creative thinking. Their entire technological history was built on overcoming limitations. Captain Miller gathered his team for a private discussion after the initial tour. "They don't need our technology," he told them. "They need our mindset, our history of overcoming problems with limited resources." Dr. Patel nodded. "They've never had to hotwire a car or fix a satellite with duct tape. They don't even understand the concept." "So what's the plan?" asked Jackson. Miller looked around at his team: engineers, physicists, mechanics, and problem solvers. "We teach them how humans fix things. We start by assessing what resources they have, what they need, and then we improvise." As the human team began their work, the Luminary watched with growing fascination. These creatures from a young planet were approaching problems in ways they had never considered, ways that sometimes seemed crude or inelegant, but undeniably effective. What the Luminary couldn't yet understand was that humanity's greatest technology wasn't their machines or computers. It was their ability to face impossible situations and simply refuse to accept defeat. 3 days into the mission, the human team had spread throughout the Luminary flagship like a colony of industrious ants. Each specialist had formed small working groups with the alien engineers, tackling different aspects of the fleet's massive problems. Mike Jackson stood in the main engine room, surrounded by technology that resembled art more than machinery. The luminary propulsion system used principles of quantum manipulation that Earth scientists had only theorized about. Yet for all its advancement, it had failed in a surprisingly basic way. Your system can't process raw materials, Jackson explained to the luminary engineers. It's designed to use pre-refined fuel that you normally produce at your home bases. Chief Engineer Ilara of the luminary nodded her elongated head. Correct. Without access to our synthesis facilities, we cannot create more fuel. Jackson tapped his tablet, bringing up a rough schematic he'd drawn. But what if we build a makeshift refinery? Your sensors can detect asteroids with the minerals you need. We could harvest them. The luminary engineers stared at him in confusion. Build a refinery. Here. Now. With what materials? Jackson grinned. With parts from your damaged ships. They're not flying anyway, right? We salvage what we need. Across the massive vessel, Dr. Patel was addressing another critical issue. The life support systems were failing because they relied on a biological component, a type of engineered algae that was dying without specific light frequencies. We can't recreate your special algae, she explained to the medical team. But we can modify Earth algae to perform a similar function. She pointed to samples she brought from Earth. These species evolved to survive in extreme conditions. With some genetic tweaking, they could replace your current system. The chief medical officer, a luminary named Terran, seemed skeptical. You propose to replace our precisely engineered life support medium with pond scum. Dr. Patel laughed. Basically, yes. Earth life isn't elegant, but it's incredibly stubborn. It survives. Meanwhile, Captain Miller was working with Admiral Krell on the bigger picture. Using holographic displays, they mapped the fleet's current position and the available resources in the outer solar system. Your ships are designed for efficiency, not self-sufficiency, Miller explained. On Earth, we learned long ago that space vessels need to be able to operate independently, using whatever resources they can find. Our civilization never faced such constraints, Admiral Krell replied. Until now. Miller nodded. That's exactly why you called us. Humans specialize in impossible situations. The breakthrough came on the 5th day. Jackson's team had successfully constructed a prototype refinery using components from 3 different damaged ships. It wasn't pretty, a jumble of reconnected parts held together with welded metal and what the humans jokingly called space tape. But initial tests showed it could process raw asteroid materials into usable fuel. At the same time, Dr. Patel's modified algae was thriving in test chambers, producing oxygen at rates that could sustain life support. The luminary leadership gathered to witness these developments, their normally reserved demeanor giving way to something like amazement. You've accomplished in days what our engineers insisted would take years, Admiral Krell said. That's the human way, Miller replied. We don't see perfect solutions. We see good enough solutions that keep us alive until we can find better ones. The plan began to take shape. The fleet would dispatch mining vessels to the asteroid belt. The makeshift refineries would process the raw materials. The ships would be refueled one by one, with priority given to those with failing life support. As the human team finalized their plans, Engineer Jackson overheard 2 luminary technicians talking quietly. They used such primitive tools, one said, yet they solve problems we couldn't even approach. Perhaps, the other replied. That is precisely why they can solve them. The humans didn't know it yet, but they were teaching the luminary something far more valuable than repair techniques. They were teaching them how to think like survivors, a lesson the elegant, advanced species had never needed to learn until now. 2 weeks into the rescue operation, the first mining vessels returned from the asteroid belt. The makeshift refineries were working better than expected, and the first batch of processed fuel was ready to power the most critical ships in the luminary fleet. Captain Miller stood on the observation deck with Admiral Krell, watching as the glowing blue fuel was transferred to the life support systems of a refugee vessel that had been running on emergency power. "We might actually pull this off," Miller said, allowing himself a moment of optimism. Admiral Krell's four eyes blinked in their strange pattern. What Miller had learned was a sign of hesitation. "Captain, there is something we have not told you, something we should have disclosed immediately." Miller felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it?" "We are being pursued," Krell said quietly. "The reason we fled our home system wasn't just a natural disaster as we led you to believe. We were attacked." The Admiral activated a holographic display showing a dark, shifting mass that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. "We call it the Shroud. It destroyed our homeworld and has been hunting the survivors ever since." Miller stared at the image. "What exactly is it?" "We don't know," Krell admitted. "Some believe it's a weapon created by an ancient enemy. Others think it's a natural phenomenon, a tear in space-time that consumes energy. All we know is that it's drawn to our technology and has followed our fleet across 17 systems. And now it's coming here," Miller said. Not a question, but a grim realization. "Yes. Our long-range sensors detected it entering your solar system yesterday. We estimate 3 weeks before it reaches our position." Miller's mind raced. "Why didn't you tell us this from the beginning?" "We feared you would refuse to help if you knew the danger," Krell said. "Many civilizations before you did exactly that." Miller immediately called an emergency meeting with his team and transmitted the new information back to Earth. The response was predictable: panic at the highest levels of government. Within hours, Miller received new orders: abandon the rescue mission and return to Earth immediately. The planet needed to prepare its defenses. Dr. Patel found Miller staring at the message in his quarters. "You're not going to obey that order, are you?" she asked. "I have to," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. 2 million luminary lives against 8 billion humans. "That's assuming this shroud thing will leave Earth alone if we hide," Jackson said, joining them. "But if it's tracking luminary technology, it's already on its way here. Running won't help." Miller knew they were right. The only logical option was to get the alien fleet operational as quickly as possible and move them away from Earth, taking the threat with them. But when he presented this plan to his superiors via video conference, he met fierce resistance. "You want us to accelerate helping aliens who brought this threat to our doorstep," General Hayes demanded. "The priority must be Earth's defense." "With all due respect, sir," Miller argued, "we don't have the technology to fight this thing. Our best defense is to help the luminary escape, drawing the threat away from our system." The debate raged for hours. Meanwhile, Dr. Patel made a discovery that changed everything. Analyzing the Shroud's energy signature from the luminary data, she found it was particularly attracted to the quantum frequency of the aliens' propulsion systems. "We could modify the drives," she explained to Miller. "Change their frequency to make them less detectable. It might buy us the time we need." Miller took this new information back to the Earth authorities, but also made a difficult decision. "Whether they authorize it or not, we're staying to help," he told his team. "I won't abandon 2 million people to die." To his surprise, every member of the human team agreed to stay. When Admiral Krell learned of their decision, the normally stoic alien showed an emotion that seemed remarkably close to human gratitude. "Your people ordered you to leave us," the Admiral said, "yet you choose to stay. Why?" Miller thought about it for a moment. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because humans don't leave people behind, even if they just met them." As the shadow of the Shroud crept closer to Neptune's orbit, the race to save the luminary fleet, and potentially Earth itself, took on a new urgency. What had begun as a rescue mission was quickly becoming a desperate fight for survival. News of the approaching Shroud spread through Earth's governments like wildfire. Despite official orders for the human team to return, Captain Miller's decision to stay resonated with people around the world. What happened next surprised everyone. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Patel said, pointing to an incoming transmission. On the screen, a fleet of 20 Earth vessels approached the luminary position. "This is Colonel Diane Foster of the International Space Coalition," announced the leader of the unauthorized mission. "We've brought engineers, scientists, and supplies. Where do you need us?" Miller stared at the screen in disbelief. "Colonel, who authorized this mission?" "No one did, Captain," she replied with a slight smile. "We all volunteered. And we're just the first wave." Over the next 3 days, more ships arrived, not just military vessels, but converted commercial ships carrying civilian volunteers. Miners from the asteroid belt colonies brought their drilling equipment. University scientists arrived with experimental technologies. Private space companies diverted their vessels to join the effort. Admiral Krell watched this growing armada with amazement. "Your government's ordered against this. Why do they come?" "Because that's what humans do," Miller explained. "When people need help, we show up. Not all of us, not always, but enough of us, most of the time." The operation expanded far beyond the original plan. With hundreds of new human workers and their equipment, the repair efforts accelerated dramatically. The makeshift refineries that Jackson had designed were now being mass-produced and deployed across the fleet. On the 13th day, they achieved their first major victory: the successful restart of the main drives on 5 luminary ships. The vessels moved into defensive positions, their systems humming with new power. But the work was far from over. The shroud had passed Neptune's orbit and was accelerating toward them. Sensor readings showed it was larger than initially estimated, its dark mass spreading like ink through space. In the flagship's main hall, now serving as a joint human luminary command center, Miller addressed the gathered workers. Thousands more watched via video link from ships throughout the fleet. "We have 10 days before the shroud reaches us," he said plainly. "At our current pace, we'll have about 60% of the fleet operational by then." "That's not good enough." A silence fell over the crowd. Then a mining foreman named Rita Garcia stood up. "My team can double our ore processing if we work in continuous shifts." A scientist from Japan's space agency raised his hand next. "We've modified our satellites to help detect energy-rich asteroids. We can cut harvesting time in half." One by one, humans offered solutions, adaptations, and commitments to work beyond what seemed physically possible. The luminary watched in stunned silence as these people from a distant planet, who owed them nothing, pledged to risk everything to save them. The next week became a blur of constant activity. Humans and luminary worked side by side, rest became optional, and each hour brought new innovations born of necessity. An elderly engineer from Kenya developed a way to temporarily bypass damaged sections of the alien power grid. A teenage prodigy who had smuggled herself aboard her mother's supply ship created an algorithm that optimized fuel distribution among the fleet. Even when accidents happened, and they did, with 2 human miners losing their lives when a refinery overloaded, the work barely paused. Their companions mourned, then worked harder in their memory. The luminary, witnessing this relentless determination, began to change. They started taking risks they would have previously considered irrational. They learned to improvise repairs instead of insisting on perfect replacements. Some even adopted human expressions and habits. 3 days before the shroud's estimated arrival, Admiral Krell found Miller taking his first break in nearly 30 hours. "We have been observing your species for decades," the Admiral said, "but we never truly understood you until now." "What do you mean?" Miller asked tiredly. "We thought your technology was primitive because it was inefficient and redundant. Now we understand. It was designed to be fixable, adaptable. Like you." The Admiral's voice carried a new emotion. "You build your tools to survive, just as you yourselves were built to survive." As the shadow of the shroud loomed closer, nearly 70% of the fleet was now operational, far more than they had thought possible. And more importantly, the luminary were learning to think like humans, finding solutions where none seemed to exist. The shroud appeared first as a darkening of the stars, a patch of space where light seemed to bend and disappear. Earth's long-range telescopes tracked its approach, transmitting images that made scientists shudder. It wasn't solid, wasn't a ship or even a swarm. It moved like a living storm of void. In the command center of the Luminary flagship, Captain Miller studied the latest data with growing concern. "It's accelerating," he announced to the gathered leaders. "New estimate puts it here in 18 hours. Admiral Krell's normally steady voice wavered slightly. "We have 178 ships operational. The remaining vessels." The Admiral didn't need to finish. Everyone knew that meant over 100 ships, carrying nearly 500,000 luminary, were still dead in space. "We need more time," Dr. Paddle said, frustration evident in her voice. "Just 3 more days, and we could save everyone." Miller paced the room, his mind racing. After a moment, he stopped and looked up at the holographic display of their position. "What if we don't run?" he said suddenly. "What if we fight?" The luminary officers stared at him in shock. Chief Engineer Ilara spoke first. "Fight the shroud. Impossible. We tried on our homeworld. Our most powerful weapons had no effect." "Your weapons," Miller clarified. "But what about ours?" Colonel Foster, who represented the Earth vessels, leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting, Captain?" Miller pointed to the display. "Earth's orbital defense network. It's not as advanced as luminary technology, but it's built differently. And there are thousands of satellites and weapons platforms. Primitive kinetic weapons and nuclear devices," Admiral Krell said dismissively. "They cannot harm the shroud." "Maybe not," Miller admitted, "but they might distract it. Buy us time." He turned to Jackson. "Your refinery design. Could we modify it to process energy instead of matter?" Jackson's eyes widened as he caught on. "You want to drain the shroud? That's crazy." "But," he paused, calculations running behind his eyes. "The principle should work. If the shroud feeds on energy as the luminary data suggests, we could create energy sinks to draw it away from the ships." For the next 12 hours, the combined human luminary forces executed the most desperate plan in either species' history. Earth's Defense Command, now fully committed to the operation, repositioned hundreds of satellites into a formation around the fleet. Each was modified with technology based on Jackson's refinery design. Meanwhile, the operational luminary ships formed a protective ring around their vulnerable sister vessels, their shields reconfigured to create a masking effect. As the shroud approached the outer defense perimeter, Captain Miller stood on the bridge of the flagship alongside Admiral Krell. The vast view screen showed the approaching darkness, swallowing stars as it came. "All ships report ready," Colonel Foster announced from her position at the tactical station. "Earth defense grid is online and standing by." Miller took a deep breath. "Let's hope this works." Execute Operation Lighthouse. Throughout the solar system, Earth's defense satellites activated simultaneously, emitting carefully calibrated energy pulses designed to attract the shroud's attention. At the same time, the ring of operational luminary ships powered down their main systems, becoming nearly invisible to the energy-sensing entity. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the shroud began to change course, drawn toward the pulsing energy of Earth's satellites. "It's working," Dr. Patel whispered. But their victory was short-lived. As the shroud engulfed the first line of satellites, it seemed to sense the trap. A tendril of darkness broke away from the main mass, probing toward the hidden fleet. "It's coming through," Jackson shouted from the sensor station. "The masking field isn't holding." Admiral Krell turned to Miller, 4 eyes blinking rapidly. "We've failed. We must evacuate who we can and flee." Miller stared at the screen, watching as the tendril of darkness approached. Then he saw something else, a small Earth vessel breaking formation, flying directly toward the probing shroud. "Who is that?" he demanded. "It's the mining ship Prometheus," Colonel Foster replied, her voice tight. "Rita Garcia's team." Before anyone could react, the mining vessel detonated its fusion core directly in front of the shroud's tendril. The explosion was blinding, a miniature sun flaring in the darkness of space. When the light faded, the tendril had recoiled, rejoining the main mass as it continued toward the satellite grid. Miller watched in stunned silence. The miners had sacrificed themselves to protect the fleet. How many were aboard? Admiral Krell asked quietly. 27, Colonel Foster replied. The Admiral's voice was solemn. Their names will be remembered among the luminary for all time. The diversion bought them precious hours. As the shroud consumed the decoy satellites, the repair teams worked at impossible speed to bring the remaining ships online. When the entity finally broke free of the trap and turned again toward the fleet, they were ready. All ships, execute emergency jump on my mark. Admiral Krell commanded. 3, 2, 1, mark. In a cascading wave of blue light, the luminary fleet, every single vessel now powered, vanished into the safety of hyperspace, leaving the shroud grasping at empty space. 1 month after the desperate escape from the shroud, the luminary fleet orbited Earth. The massive alien ships, now fully repaired and gleaming in the sunlight, created an awe-inspiring sight in the night sky visible to everyone on the planet below. In the Grand Council chamber of the flagship, representatives from every nation on Earth gathered with the luminary high command. The chamber had been redesigned to accommodate human visitors, with special sections for the families of those who had died during the rescue mission. Admiral Krell stood before the assembly, his tall frame bowing slightly in a gesture of respect that he had learned from humans. 3 months ago, we arrived in your system as refugees with little hope of survival, the Admiral began. Today, we depart as allies of humanity, and as something more, as students of your remarkable species. Captain Miller, now promoted to commander for his leadership, sat in the front row next to Dr. Patel and Engineer Jackson. All three had been awarded the highest honors from both Earth and the luminary. Before we leave, Admiral Krell continued, I must share the complete truth about why we sought Earth's help specifically. A hush fell over the chamber as the Admiral activated a holographic display showing ancient luminary text. For thousands of years, our histories have told of a prophecy, a species that would arise among the stars with what we called the gift of ordered chaos. A people who could see beyond perfect solutions to find imperfect ones that worked when they were needed most. The text transformed into images of early human history, cave paintings, ancient tools, early machines. We discovered your broadcasts 60 years ago and began studying your development. We saw how you advanced not through perfect efficiency like us, but through constant adaptation, failure, and renewal. When the shroud attacked our homeworld, our leaders remembered the prophecy and the small blue planet we had been watching. Miller exchanged glances with his team. They had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was still surprising. The Admiral continued, we believed you might help us repair our ships, but you gave us something far more valuable. You taught us how to think differently, how to face impossible odds with determination and creativity. The luminary High Chancellor came forward then, holding an ornate container. As a token of our eternal gratitude, we offer humanity 3 gifts. The Chancellor opened the container. First, the complete database of luminary medical knowledge, which will eliminate most diseases that still afflict your people. Murmurs of amazement spread through the human delegation. Second, the principles of clean energy generation that powers our fleet, which will end your dependence on fossil fuels and prevent the climate damage that threatens your world. The Earth representatives broke into spontaneous applause. And finally, the Chancellor said, lifting a small crystal device, star maps and navigation data for 500 life-supporting systems within reach of your current technology. The stars are now open to humanity. After the formal ceremony, Commander Miller found himself alone with Admiral Krell on the observation deck, looking down at Earth. So what happens now? Miller asked. Your fleet is repaired. The shroud seems to have lost your trail. Where will you go? Admiral Krell's 4 eyes blinked thoughtfully. We will seek a new homeworld, But our journey has changed. We are not merely refugees anymore. We are explorers, like you. The Admiral turned to Miller. And we would be honored if some of your people would join us. Miller raised his eyebrows. You want humans to come with you? Yes. We need your perspective. Your, what do you call it? Outside-the-box thinking. In return, we offer the stars. Before Miller could respond, a technician rushed onto the deck. Commander Miller, Admiral, we've detected the shroud again. It's moving through the outer system, but it's not approaching Earth. It seems to be searching. Miller and Krell exchanged a knowing look. Their battle wasn't over. I think, Miller said slowly, that Earth and the Luminary have more reasons to work together than we thought. Admiral Krell nodded. Indeed, and perhaps that was the true purpose of the prophecy, not just that you would save us, but that together we would face what comes next. As the first light of dawn broke over Earth's horizon, casting golden light across the deck, the two leaders of vastly different species stood side by side, contemplating a future neither could have imagined before their paths crossed. The Luminary fleet would depart the next day, with 2,000 human volunteers aboard, engineers, scientists, soldiers, and explorers. They would carry with them the best of humanity, courage, creativity, and an unbreakable determination to overcome any challenge. And on Earth, a new era was beginning, with luminary knowledge accelerating human technology and the spirit of cooperation that had saved the alien fleet inspiring nations to work together. Humanity looked to the stars not with fear, but with hope. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for humans all along.